This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Trump in Nashville for a big rally yesterday, in which he trotted out some of the classics on immigration and
oh yeah, we're gonna build the wall and Mexico's gonna pay for it.
Impersonations of Pagliacci and the like. But you got to update the act because of new information on the ground, like the infiltrator.
So how do you like the fact they had people infiltrating our campaign? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Can you imagine people infiltrating our campaign? Is there anybody in this big, beautiful arena right now that's infiltrating our campaign? Would you please raise your hand?
And then Bob Corker.
That would take courage, huh? Now, look, you take a look at what's going on. Never in the history of our country has something taken place like took place during this election.
All right, so that's Trump on the infiltrator. Of course, he's talking about Stefan Halper, who's the one infiltrator, asset, spy, source, however you want to term it.
Informant. We've heard it all.
The one that we know so far. Now, Trey Gowdy was asked about the same infiltrator by Martha McCallum yesterday. And do we have Trey Gowdy? Oh, yeah, Gowdy here. And he had this to say.
Chris Wray and Rod Rosenstein have at least made it clear to us Donald Trump was never the target of the investigation. He's not the current target in the investigation. Now, keep in mind, that can all change depending on what a witness says. But as of now, I think Chris Wray and Rod Rosenstein are stunned whenever people think Trump is the target of their investigation. I'll leave it up to them how to brief the president or how to brief his lawyers.
Was that point of view that you're talking about right now, was that strengthened when you went into this briefing last week?
Yes. I am even more convinced that the FBI did exactly what my fellow citizens would want them to do when they got the information they got, and that it has nothing to do with Donald Trump.
So can we reconcile the statement by Trump and the statement by Gowdy? One, we're not talking about Christopher Wray's FBI. We're talking about Jim Comey's at the time. Number two, the idea that Trump was not then and is not now the target of the investigation. Does anybody believe, I mean, with all due respect to Trey Gowdy, does anybody believe that Bob Mueller's target in the special counsel investigation is not President Trump? Does anyone believe, as Amy McCarthy has been writing about for months and months on end at National Review, that this isn't about getting to impeachment for Trump? For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Roger Kimball, who's the editor of The New Criterion and a columnist for PJ Media. He's got a recent piece on this topic we need to discuss. Roger, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yes, my pleasure.
So what about the statements from Trump, which the one at the rally yesterday, not inconsistent with what he's been saying, and then what Trey Gowdy had to say?
Well, as much as I admire Trey Gowdy, I have to say that I've been somewhat puzzled by his attitude toward aspects of this. I'm not sure whether to call it an investigation or circus or cover-up, whatever it is that Robert Mueller is conducting. I noted early on that he kept reiterating what a great guy Robert Mueller was, a straight arrow, and we have to let him, do his job. But the more I looked into Mueller, the less I believed it. And you were asking your audience just now whether anyone could really believe that this extraordinarily complex, confusing, open-ended investigation could have any other end in view than the removal of the president. And it is true that people have demonstrated enormous reserves of credulity, and I suppose there's someone out there who could believe otherwise. But I think for most Americans, it's quite clear that what we see in this circus is an effort by our intelligence services and their masters in the deep state to engage in, first of all, a cover-up of their own wrongdoing, with the ultimate aim, as you suggest, of providing a pretext for the impeachment of the president.
Well,
I don't think there's any question about that.
well, so Gowdy denies Trump's conspiracy. Should President Trump come forward and say, just tell America the truth that maybe it wasn't a spy planted, or is that fake news?
Well, I don't quite understand the motivation of Mr. Gowdy, except that it has been my observation that people who have been part of this process, as Mr. Gowdy was, he's a former prosecutor,
Right.
have a great allegiance to the institution. You find people who are commenting on this, and they are loath to believe that an institution of which they were a part, which they served faithfully, could be quite so corrupt, because all the people they know were not corrupt.
Although
I think that is part of this story anyway. But it's go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but it is interesting because Gowdy has been reticent to criticize Mueller. You're right; he's shown great deference to Mueller, but not so for some of the other actors in this drama, the James Clappers and the John Brennans of the world. So,
Yes.
Gowdy also has sort of explained, okay, so if you think that Brennan and Clapper and perhaps others have been less than forthright, acted less than honorably, he's been concerned about unmasking that went on by Samantha Power, by Susan Rice. So, it's kind of like everybody around this one institution you want to protect, you find problems with, but somehow that institution is inviolate and hasn't been corrupted by all of these other engaged senior level officials at the other agencies.
Yes, I personally, I find my credulity strained by that proposition. It seems to me that what we have here is, at the end of the day, it is an effort to cover up what happened with Hillary's emails and her misuse of classified information, but also what began as an effort to create what Mr. Struck called an insurance policy against the unlikely contingency that Donald Trump should be elected, mutated after he was elected into an effort to undermine his presidency. And I mean, it really is quite extraordinary if you look at the indictments that Robert Mueller has handed down. They have nothing to do. None of them have anything to do with collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. That is what this investigation was supposed to be about. At least that's what we were told it was about. But it has nothing to do with that. Now, let's stipulate that, of course, the Russians in this election, as in every other election for decades, have endeavored to interfere and cause mischief in our election. We do the same thing to the elections of other countries. We were right there in Israel's election. We didn't want Netanyahu to win, and we, paid plenty of money to try to assure that he wouldn't. But that is not the issue here. Yes, Russians they took out some Facebook ads, they did some other things, but it had nothing to do with the Trump campaign. It was all about trying to create this insurance policy to be sure that Donald Trump would not be elected. And then when he was elected, to undermine his presidency. And the mobilization of the intelligence services of his country and the coercive power of its police services and the institution of the FBI on the part of one administration against another administration is something that should give every American pause. This is, in my view, it's the biggest political scandal in the history of the country. It dwarfs Watergate.
Okay, Marcel, you're on board with the president in terms of that assessment. I wanted to ask you, because the new Criterion does so much, offers so much content on culture. I wanted to get your take on this interview over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal of James Davison Hunter, the academic who's kind of credited with coming up with the kind of culture wars paradigm for what's been happening in this country since at least the mid-1980s. Predates that, but his version of what was happening. And he suggests that reason and science aren't particularly better suited than fundamentalist religion from a bygone era to provide a stable basis for morality, for the moral order, even in the face of secularization, because it essentially throws us back on ourselves. You have your truth and I have mine. And I wonder if that is playing out in like this most recent saga of the Roseanne Barr tweets, where you have some arguing, this is a contest between conservatives and liberals in this divided country to see who can one-up the other when it comes to outrage for the purposes of expunging content or a behavior they don't like, and that's not taking us to a productive place.
Yeah. Well, let's stipulate that Roseanne Barr's tweet was in very bad taste.
So stipulated.
There's a lot of bad taste around.
Yes.
Yes. And why is it okay for Bill Maher, as someone pointed out, to assert that Donald Trump was the spawn of an orangutan and his mother? That's okay, but it's not okay for Roseanne Barr to emit her tweet about Valerie Jarrett. Sure, it's in very bad taste, but bad taste should not, in my view, be illegal. But put that to one side. I think that what we are seeing now in this country is the elevation of a pseudo concept of diversity fueled by an intolerant identity politics. What it has done is it has ripped the floor of common values out of this country to such an extent that people no longer feel that we're all in this together. Now, this is not the first time it's happened, but it's the velocity that modern communications provide to these ideas makes it very toxic. I mean, the 1800 election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson was virulent. People were calling everyone all sorts of names. Of course, there was the Civil War. We're right now on the 50th anniversary of 1968 and all of those outrages. So this is not, unprecedented. But what I think is new is the modality in which these controversies play themselves out. So that you have Roseanne Barr emitting a tweet at 10 a.m. and then all of a sudden you get this avalanche of outrage. Which, I mean, really, when you come right down to it, I mean, Roseanne is probably to be more pitied than anything. I mean, she's clearly a person with mental health issues, as they say. But leaving that to one side, I think that anyone who has the future of this country at heart should start to think about what it is we can do to pull people together and to return perhaps to the wisdom of people like James Madison when he warned about the destructive potential in hyper partisanship, what he called faction, and what we can do to overcome those factions. I think that the president, I think in his commencement address at Annapolis, said that America is done apologizing for itself. I think that's a hopeful sign. We should recognize and celebrate those things that make this a great country, including the freedom we have to engage in robust debate and dissent.
He is Roger Kimball, editor of the New Criterion and columnist for PJ Media. His most recent column, For Your Eyes Only, A Short History of Democrat Spy Collusion. Roger, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.